Welcome back to Open Line, everyone. Glad you're with us. We were talking about the Electoral College vote being challenged by Tennessee senators. That vote takes place tomorrow in Congress. Here in Tennessee, State Representative Mike Stewart has sent a letter to Marsha Blackburn asking her to cite specific evidence that this election was problematic, that it was tainted in any way. He has not heard back from her, but we have heard from a lot of callers. We have a bunch of calls who want to talk about this. So let's bring in Representative Stewart again, and let's just go to the phones. Let's go to Wendell. Hello, Wendell.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
Fine. Go right ahead.
All right. Hey, first of all, I think we ought to legalize marijuana, but other than that, I do really honestly think that we ought to overlook the ballots. I really don't know about, well, let's say it like this. I will accept Mr. Biden as president just like I would any other president. But I really think we ought to look over the ballots. I mean, you know, what could it hurt?
So you don't have a problem with them putting a commission together and really making sure the election was not tainted?
Right. I mean, you know, it could be. There's a lot of people. It's a 50-50 world out there.
Okay.
And everybody's life matters.
Okay. Well, Representative Stewart, there you have it. I mean, you have somebody saying, what's the harm in looking at this more closely?
Well, first of all, I can tell by listening that the caller is a reasonable person who is willing to accept a president, even if it's not the person he voted for. And that's great. I mean, that's where we need to be in America. And again, you know, shame on me if I ever don't accept a Republican official just because I don't agree with them. You know, because I don't run the country. I don't run even my district. The people run the district, the city, the state, the country. That's what makes our country great. My problem is, though, the election laws set a very clear timetable because we need to have certainty when you have an election. And all of these states have opportunities for people to do exactly what you're talking about, sir, which is challenge the election, raise evidence, and establish, that there's been fraud, that there's been a problem. And in this case, those mechanisms were used by Trump's team to try to present evidence of fraud. The problem that they ran into was there really is no fraud. And no matter how many times people want to say it on internet websites, no matter how many times people want to tweet it, the facts are the facts. You know what I look back at during this period is President Bush. You know, I probably go back, I was not a supporter of President Bush. I'm a Democrat. I was opposed to him. I criticized him at the time he was in office. But you know what, President Bush, he was presented with the fact that even though he went into Iraq based on the concern that there were weapons of mass destruction, at the end of the day, the CIA reported to him and our intelligence authorities said, look, we didn't find them. And President Bush, to his great credit, didn't try to then make up some nonsense about weapons of mass destruction. Because he is a legitimate political actor and a leader, he said, you know what, I was wrong. There were no weapons of mass destruction. I made the call that I thought was right. It didn't turn out correctly. Well, that's the kind of politics we need in our country. And the fact of the matter is, even though I didn't agree with President Bush on political matters, he was a duly elected president and had the right to rule. He made a call, and he had the guts to come up and tell the American people, look, I was wrong about that. I used the best evidence that I thought I had available, but it didn't work out. Okay. He, of course, served with Vice President Cheney, and Cheney's daughter has it just right when she says, now as Congresswoman from Wyoming, you can't just keep replaying this tape. We have a process for challenging an election. That process has already been done. Trump people challenged in Pennsylvania and multiple other places, challenged the results of the election. The courts looked at it. They said, this is all not true. There's nothing there. And so what the law says now is it's time to respect and count the Electoral College votes. That happens tomorrow. And there's just no legitimate reason not to do it. And the problem is, if we did what some have suggested, which is, well, let's have a commission. at the end of that commission, okay, let's have an appeal. Now we have an appeal to the Supreme Court. And we don't have what we have in the United States of America, which is a peaceful transition of power. So again, now I can tell you come to this, I'm talking to the caller from the right place. Like me, I can tell you believe, look, if the guy got elected, even if I don't agree with it, that's what we need, okay? But I think there's a lot more danger to the process you're suggesting than you do. So that's maybe our disagreement. I believe that when you have an election, people have a process they need to go through. The Trump team did that. The problem is they never could find any real evidence. The courts all across the country have rejected President Trump's team's positions. And these aren't just Democrats, they're Republicans, it's the Supreme Court of the United States. Everybody has rejected all of this because in a court you actually have to come forward with some evidence, and they couldn't come up with any of it.
That's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah,
what if the whole weapons of mass destruction thing came up now? That's an interesting example. That President Bush did say, I made a mistake and we were wrong. And in this world we live in now, you wonder, would that be said? It would be so easy to say, no, it's true or whatever, and fake news or whatever. But it's an interesting point. I got a ton of calls.
Well,
Let's keep going.
I will tell you this. If President Bush were in office, he would do the same thing. There's no doubt in my mind. And the reason is because he's a person of integrity. Again, I don't think he was a good president. I didn't agree with his political positions. But at least he had the personal integrity to say what was true and to not say what was not true. And we need to get back to that in politics. And this whole idea that we have all these courts that have looked at the evidence, evaluated it, and made their decision. And now we have two senators who are unwilling to come on this show, who are unwilling to certainly debate me, who are afraid and unwilling to actually come forward with any evidence, still go around and publicly say that the election was tainted. That's something we've never seen in this country, and it's a complete outrage.
Let's go to another call here. We have a bunch. Let's go to Mike. Hello, Mike.
Hey, good evening, Ben, and Happy New Year to you, and good evening to Representative Stewart as well. I think you do a great job on Capitol Hill, as well as a few others up there, and you guys just keep fighting the good fight, and I know it's difficult. But as far as the senators, what they're doing is very immature. But I think when you look at that group that has sprouted from one senator to, I don't know, 12, 15, how many it is, maybe not that much, I think it's all political theater because they know now that Trump is going to be out of office. At 12:01 p.m., January 20th, Trump will not any longer be president. I'll put my house on the market to prove it and reassure you of that. But they know as that happens, and there are probably going to be some New York State charges from the New York State Attorney General, and they've got information that Mueller's given them. All these people talking about radio shows, the man is probably going to be indicted in prison or house arrest for the rest of his life. But what they're trying to do is find that next Trump person. But this time it'll be a Trump person who does have a little bit of political experience. And they know that just like Sarah Palin, Trump is going to fade on out, believe it or not. But that base needs a new leader. They need somebody who can make policy changes. So I think a lot of that is part of that. But I question, do they still value legacy and history and how the history books will look back on how they acted this whole term of President Trump? And I think it's going to be shameful for anybody that would have any of their last names and were kin to them to say how we to explain that. And also, ending this call,
okay,
I think Governor Lee should be very embarrassed about us being globally known as the state with the most cases of COVID. That is some of the history books in Tennessee will be recording too. Hope you guys have a good night, and Happy New Year to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. A lot there on that call. One of his theories that he thinks these senators are vying for, 4 years from now and trying to kind of carry the mantle, maybe be the next Republican nominee. Is that a theory that you have or care to comment on?
I think that's probably true. I mean, I think Senator Cruz is very ambitious. And Senators, I don't know Hagerty, but Blackburn obviously is an ambitious person. And yes, I think the caller is probably spot on. Obviously, you can tell from the caller's points that he's a student of politics. I think he's spot on that this is pandering designed to create a new generation of leadership to get the Trump base. The problem is, and I'm not disagreeing with the caller, I think he agrees, is that there's some lines that we should not cross in our politics. We don't want to live in Hungary. We don't want to live in Poland. We don't want to live in Venezuela. The reason our politics are like they are is because leaders have been consistently responsible for many generations. And when you do what Senator Blackburn and Senator Hagerty are doing, you're basically taking the legacy of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, and you're throwing it in the trash. You're trampling on our sacred traditions. And they should be ashamed of themselves. And they are not carrying out their proper constitutional role or their role as leaders in our country. To think of another example, Richard Nixon lost the 1960 election very narrowly. Richard Nixon was an ambitious person. He brought himself up from nowhere, from a lemon farm in California, to become president of the United States on his own steam, by all accounts. And Richard Nixon wanted to be president more than anybody else. But you know what? When President Kennedy won narrowly, Richard Nixon didn't challenge the results because he knew that he lost, and he knew it was irresponsible to cast aspersions on the election. That was Richard Nixon. So unfortunately, Senators Blackburn and Hagerty do not rise to the level of political legitimacy and patriotism shown by Richard Nixon in 1960. Honestly, it's hard to overstate just what a complete outrageous act they are planning to commit tomorrow. And don't listen to me, those of you who are watching. Go ahead and get on Google and Google Liz Cheney and see what Vice President Cheney's daughter is saying about this. She says it's a complete abandonment of Republican principles. So does Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House. The fact is, this is just an outrageous act. The idea that you would call into question our elections, it's the sort of thing you see in failed countries like Russia. It's totally ridiculous. And I would say it really calls into question whether or not Senators Blackburn and Hagerty really should be in the jobs that they have. I'm not saying that, they've been elected, so they get to serve. But really, it calls on somebody, both in the Democrat and Republican Party, to step up and take those jobs. Because if people will not lead when it comes to protecting the Constitution of the United States and our basic constitutional system, they probably should not have these positions of significant power. It's particular disappointment with Hagerty, who's a lawyer, who knows better. He knows what he's doing is dishonest. He knows what he's doing is completely unconstitutional and outrageous.
All right, let's take another call here. Let's go to Ann. Hello, Ann.
Yes. First,
right ahead.
I'd like to thank Representative Stewart for his letter. I agree 100% with what I heard, and if you don't mind, before I finish, please read more of it. I also agree with what he has to say about Blackburn and Hagerty, but I'd like to lump Bill Lee right in there with them, because his ambition is to either follow along with Donald wherever he may go after the 20th, because his focus has been whatever the president has wanted Bill Lee to do for the last 4 years, and especially the last 12 months. And all you have to do is look at our COVID numbers to know that that's how our state is functioning right now. So thank you. And listeners, please listen. I've been calling these two senators for weeks. They do not get back to their constituents. I know. So, Mr. Stewart, thank you again for your letter. Mr. Hall, please read more of it, and I'll let you take more calls.
Well, Ann, thanks for the call. Okay, I mean, it's not a long letter. So Representative Stewart has said a lot of it when he talks about this is not a normal thing to do. He asked several questions, though. You do, Representative Stewart. I'll read that part of the letter. Could you please identify the specific examples of violations of law or other actions that you believe justify your refusal to respect the Electoral College vote? To the extent that the information relied on by you has been evaluated by the courts, are you taking issue with or rejecting the holdings of certain courts? If so, could you identify the specific judicial decisions that you reject? So those are some questions you asked. You said you haven't heard back. But I just wanted to read that a little more for Ann. It's not a long letter, Ann, and you're kind of getting the gist of it.
And I would say thank you, Ann, for saying that. Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Put up or shut up. You know, they're saying they're going to go in and officially reject the presidential election, an election that involved over 100 million citizens. You know, people who were working in their jobs took time off to go vote. People left their employment to go down, stand in line, risk COVID, and vote. That's how this works. Each American citizen carries the right to vote. It's a sacred right. They run the show. That is how our whole system is supposed to work. And what Senators Blackburn and Hagerty are shamefully suggesting is that you can just cast that aside. And sure, we all know that they're kind of doing this with a wink, saying to their supporters who care about the Constitution, look, don't worry about it. This is just a joke. I'm just pandering. You know, they almost say that in their announcement. What they said in their announcement, which contains not one single specific fact suggesting that this election was not appropriate. What they say in their announcement is, oh, we've heard from all these angry people about the election. Look, I'm angry about lots of elections. You know, I'm often angry when the candidates I support lose. But guess what? That's my tough luck. This is the United States of America. I don't get to just superimpose my view on the views of people in another district or in the state of Tennessee as a whole. You know, in recent years, Republicans have done well in elections in Tennessee, and many times my candidates have lost. Well, I don't like that, but that's the way the system works. If people want to vote for Republicans, then the Republicans get to rule in those areas.
And you say that pretty much in the letter too, Ann.
That's right.
Yeah, you say that in the letter.
And that's the reason I keep mentioning this, is because I don't want people to look at this discussion as they would a normal political discussion. I could have plenty of discussions with Senator Blackburn or Senator Hagerty in which we disagreed on issues, you know, in which we disagreed on issues like the rights of workers to organize, you know, and that is their right to oppose my views and for us to have philosophical discussions. They're elected, you know, they're senators. I view them as legitimately elected.
Well,
that's different from what we're doing here, where they are essentially undermining our entire system of government with what they're doing.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back, get more calls, a bunch of calls. Take a break, be back right after this.